I'm very excited to be joined again by Claire DeLune from Tiny Desk. Claire was on the very first season of Back to the City, back when we were at Cyanide Radio.
That's true.
And that was just before the release of the Night Flowers EP, the second EP from Tiny Desk.
Correct.
And now is just before the release of the first full length from Tiny Desk.
Yes.
That EP ended up being the EP, the best EP of 2016, according to us at City Pages.
Yeah.
In the write-up that City Pages did. And that ended, Tiny Desk have offered up yet another deeply moving, evocative artistic statement that leaves us entranced and wanting more.
Yeah, that was very nice of them.
Yeah. And we're about to get it. When you were here before, we were focusing on, of course, mainly the 4 songs on Night Flowers.
Yeah.
But we did dip into, we did a kind of, this is your life, Claire DeLune kind of thing.
Some deep cuts.
Yeah, it was that. So we looked back, for example, at New Lion, which was the first release that you had as a solo artist.
Yep.
We reflected on that and the fact that it was actually whilst you were working on what you were expecting to be the second R&B record that you found yourself at the Sound Gallery and met Grant Cutler.
Yep.
Can you refresh our memories? How did that initial interaction go? Because by now, all the Tiny Desk stuff on record is just the two of you, isn't it?
Yeah. So I was at the time in a band called The Chalice, and we were pretty busy at that point.
That's Lizzo and Sophia. I'm sure everyone knows.
Yeah, Lizzo and Sophia Ayres and myself, this all-female hip-hop group. And we were at this party at the Sound Gallery because Lizzo had a band at the time called The Club with Mike McLaughlin and Manchita and Spider Baby. And they were performing at this event as well. So I was there with them, just kind of hanging out, and The Chalice was, moving right along. That was my main deal, my main project. And I guess it's more like hindsight's 2020 that I was feeling sort of creatively unfulfilled at the time, but I was listening to a lot of indie music in my spare time and always have, so just a ton of like Beach House and Grizzly Bear and Phanogram and a bunch of stuff that you can probably hear the influences of pretty heavily in what we do now. But I just didn't really know there was anybody in Minneapolis making that kind of music or doing that style of production. And I saw Grant play a set with Abby Wolf. Wolf Lords.
Yeah.
And I think it was like 2 a.m. or something, as is typical at the Sound
Gallery. It's the ideal time to see Wolf Lords.
Yeah. And I was just completely blown away. Abby's incredible, obviously, but his production style was like everything I didn't know that I wanted to do but really wanted to do.
Yeah. And
it was sort of like a eureka moment for me. It sounds really maybe scripted or whatever, but I saw it. I was like, I have to make songs with that guy. Yeah. And I didn't know him at all.
He knew the Chalice. I'm sure it would have been difficult to not know the Chalice.
Well, luckily for me, he knew who I was, because otherwise I think the next part of the story would have not led to anything, which is that I just sort of like liquid courage, drunkenly wandered up to him after his set and was like, "Hi, I'm Claire. I am a singer and I want to make songs with you. Are you down?" And he was just like, "Oh yeah, I've heard you sing. Yeah, you're a good singer. Let's do it."
So and you thought at the time that it would be just for New Lion.
Yeah. Well, so I was working on a solo record at the time. I actually did a couple songs with Laserbeak that never saw the light of day. So I kind of thought either for nothing or for that, or just for fun. But there was really, as is true in a lot of the impetus of a lot of artistic things, like there really wasn't a whole lot of logic behind it. I just heard this guy's stuff and I was just like, I have to make songs with him. Like that's everything that I didn't know I wanted to be doing. And I'm like, oh yeah, now that's my full-time job, is making songs with that guy. So he was still living in Minneapolis at the time, and we just started meeting up on a semi-regular basis at his house in Powderhorn, and mostly just hanging out, and then occasionally working on music. And those sessions became the first draft of the first EP. And eventually it just sort of
eponymous.
The self-titled. And eventually it just sort of became clear, like, A, these songs don't really fit with anything else I'm doing, and B, I suddenly don't really even care about anything else I'm doing.
Because they're not very R&B.
No, and neither was what I wanted. I don't think. I just didn't know. I sort of was like listlessly going from one thing to the next, and I don't think I knew until I knew what I wanted my music to sound like.
in the interview with me before, and in an interview that you did with Andrea Swenson a little bit before then, you were talking about success.
Yeah.
And reconsidering what the term success means, or what it...
Speaking of being drunk, Andrea Swenson totally got me tipsy on like almost an entire bottle of white wine for that interview. So I said a whole lot. I said a whole lot. It was good.
Yeah, which
you to be frank.
Yeah, and then which you then referred to as the most open and honest, perhaps fragile, vulnerable you'd been in an interview.
Well, it's amazing what a half a bottle of white wine will do to make you open and vulnerable.
And open the door to many other similar interview experiences.
Well, it's weird because this interview now is taking place. I feel like there's pre-November life and post-November life. For me, at least. Mm-hmm. And I feel like any sort of airs or, suspension of disbelief or whatever, any of those things that it would have been appropriate for me to feel like as an artist to have in an interview or something like that.
Yeah.
It just feels inappropriate now. We're sort of all in this together and we're in a life raft, kind of,
Right.
And we're all musicians and, carpenters and garbage workers, we're all just sort of in this life raft together now.
Yeah.
And we always were, but it's just very obvious. And so I feel like having a canned answer to a question in an interview or something like that, it just is life's too short. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So being human, that's something that's really important for the ethos of Tiny Deaths anyway.
Yeah. Very vulnerable music.
Yeah, and you've foregrounded that Rumi quote, which is in...
It's in January.
Yeah, post-November. January.
Yeah. Quite literally January.
The wound is where the light comes.
Yeah.
That's the line in January.
Yeah, it's a paraphrase.
The wound is where the light enters you.
Yeah, it's the Rumi quote. Yeah. For me, at least, and I think for a lot of artists, maybe even definitely still, there's this sort of Wizard of Oz curtain of your public self, your private self, or whatever, and just the way you carry yourself, your candor. We definitely keep a lot of cards up our sleeves because we need to. It's important to have a personal, private part of you in addition to a public part of you, but at the same time I just feel what we do is only important at this point if it makes life more bearable, if it brings out humanity in people, if it assists in that in some way. Otherwise, music is not curing cancer. I mean, it's really important, but there's people doing dangerous work out in the street to make our lives better. So I feel if I can't be just real, who do any of us think we are? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think this honesty and the capacity to be honest, to some extent, the improv work that has also had a massive impact on what Tiny Deaths has become. Certainly the band Tiny Deaths. As we just established, we're tracking this in January, and throughout January there are residencies by both Andrew Broder. We were both out yesterday at that, and Martin Dosh at Ice House through into February.
Yeah, both very influential artists.
Absolutely, yeah. And when they were, the two of them sitting where you're sitting just now, they were talking on very similar lines. Let's focus a little bit more on the experimentation and the being willing to improvise. And to what extent has that led to an ability to be yet more vulnerable? You've been doing more improv work. I've seen you at House of Dosh last year, performing at that,
and this year coming up.
And this year,
I'll be there.
Yeah, the greater improv work that you've done, how has that had an impact on the manner in which, or the extent to which, you can kind of express your full humanity in your music and beyond?
I mean, I don't think there's a whole lot more vulnerable you can be as a musician than doing improvisation.
Exactly,
because you're sort of out on a limb in the most literal sense of the word. You don't even know what the next sound is going to be. So I think that's one of the cool things about improv, and maybe the coolest thing about it is that it's sort of this sense that everybody who's in the room is in on it, and it's a unique experience that will only be had by those people. And I don't know, I think improv's taught me a lot of really valuable things. I don't know how literally I apply it to how vulnerable I get in my songwriting, but I would say that it has taught me a lot about trust. Trusting the musicians that you're working with, because in a lot of ways it's sort of like a trust fall to sort of get into that situation with them. And trusting yourself to know that you are capable of doing that, because it's can be intimidating at first, to just be like, I'm going to get up in front of a bunch of people, which is already a little intimidating, and I'm going to not have any idea what I'm going to do in front of them.
Trust and collaboration, a lot of values that are really, and community, that are really important, especially now that we're on this lifeboat, seem to be epitomized by the improv context.
Yeah. Also trusting the audience, trusting that if they're at a show like that they know what to expect, they know it's not always going to be perfect, and that they're kind of on your team and rooting for you to make something cool. Yeah. So yeah, it is a very communal thing, and it's a really positive thing. I haven't written that much in the last few months. I've written a few songs, but I haven't written enough to know how different, how it's going to affect my music, you know? Because it is January, so it's been 2 months. So I've written a few songs. I wrote one song, actually, that's loosely about the aftermath of that. There's no way anyone will ever know which one it is, because a lot of it is very cloaked in metaphor and stuff, but it's about it for me, at least.
So you know the genesis of that song, though, and maybe there are other Tiny Death songs which are very influenced by specific political events, but if so, they're cloaked in metaphor too.
Not yet. I mean, honestly, this is the first time, this batch of songs that I just started writing this year is the first time I've really pushed myself to try intentionally to write about things that are not related to relationships and love and loss and just basic human experiences. I'm still endlessly inspired by that stuff, and I'll write songs about that till I die.
Good, because I think that's quintessential Tiny Death.
It is quintessential.
I can't imagine Tiny Death without any of that.
I think it's less like abandoning that as inspirational and more just like finding those same themes and emotions in more unexpected sources. And I did that actually a little bit on Elegies, because there's a song called The Tide that is not, it's about depression, actually. It's not about a relationship at all. But that was the first one I wrote for this project, at least, that was just completely about internal struggles that aren't relating to another person. So
that has a recurring lyric, holding on and letting go, or at least, does that recur? That's a lyric.
That's all lyric, yeah.
And then the chorus is, when you wake up and you're further down the line. There's a lot of metaphors of journeying and traveling that we'll be digging into in mixed metaphor. So this is a song which stands out as having a different genesis than the others.
So the line is, when you wake up and you're further down the line, before you know you're out of time, make up your mind to get your shit together. In so many words, you know? And before you just wake up and you've been in a depression or in a whatever headspace for a really long time, or before you wake up and you let your life pass you by, basically.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites on the record, actually. Cool. It's a little bit softer and more reflective.
It's more of a deep cut. It's not a single, or it isn't gonna be a single. It could be.
It kind of builds to a crescendo.
I love that.
Yeah, me too. And it does something similar to what Elegies, the album, does as a whole, insofar as it seems like it's reluctant to have too neat a progress narrative.
Yeah.
So, and what I mean by that very specifically, we've got that recurring chorus, then right near the end, as it's building to this crescendo, we've got lots of just repetition of when you wake up, when you wake up, when you wake up. What's the significance of, so it definitely builds up to this crescendo and then becomes sparse again at the end.
There's no metaphorical significance to that, I don't think.
It just sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of decisions, like you had asked me before about sequencing, like the order, and in that case, that are more musical than narrative decisions. When you have a crescendo, I mean, not to get too like nerdy songwriting, but it's good to have your audience have a chance to like hear the contrast again of something more sparse, so that they can kind of feel the lack of the big build.
Yeah, then in the euphoria
before you hear the next song. You know?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's less of a narrative choice and more of a musical choice. But I think that a lot of the emotional narrative of the songs are told in Grant's music and production, and also in the way that the dynamics are and stuff. I think it kind of tells you how to feel in a similar way that like a light show at a show tells you how to feel, like things that are just sort of subtle cues that aren't necessarily explicit lyrically or story-wise.
So talking about sequencing and storytelling, when we were focusing on Night Flowers before, you said that you wrote the songs without a sense of what the overall story of the EP would be. Yeah. But then when selecting which of the songs from the Humans Win recording session, that produced everything that's on Elegies. Yeah. When determining which would go on that EP and in which order, there was a little bit more of a narrative component. Yeah. So, it begins with Ever. You were saying there that although it's the beginning, it's like the end of a relationship, looking back at the relationship. The music video was a way in which we kind of dug into what's happening with that song. Yeah. I just feel like people get
hung up on logic and narrative and stuff a lot. And coming from a background as a singer-songwriter originally, I've definitely very experienced in that. Yep. But I think that the coolest thing about Tiny Desk and the thing that is the most consistently inspirational to me is more just the idea of creating a mood and a world for the listener to sort of exist in. Yeah. Certainly lyrics are very important to me, and I think that's a hallmark of something we do that's cool, is that they aren't just random free association words. I mean, there are stories there. I do take a lot of care, but also like they're experiential songs as well, and maybe even more so than cerebral, like brain food. I mean, they could be either one, but
I think they are both.
Yeah, they're definitely both. But I mean, in all of our videos pretty much to date, there's like a loose narrative that we know what it is, but it's kind of more about mood and color palette and setting the tone and the sort of experience of how you experience the song in a visual way, versus like, I kind of hate music videos most of the time that when you hear the song, all of a sudden all you can think about is like the video and what's happening in the video and the story of the video. The story
of the video, yeah.
I don't like that.
But with this one, it just captures a moment in time. There's a figure in a bath. Yeah. There's like petals from flowers.
Yeah, well, that's
in
like
a bath.
Metaphor, because she's in a bath full of orchids that have been separated from their stems, so they're literally flowers that are wilting and will die. So, but she's like bathing in that and soaking that in, and that's a metaphor for the relationship. Like if the relationship was at one point on a stem and you know that it's over, but you're still trying to soak it in as much as you can, that was like a metaphor for that. So knowing that, I think, definitely adds another dimension to the experience of the video. Yeah. But ultimately, I think and hope that you can just watch it and kind of get a feel for the world that we're trying to create without really knowing what's going on necessarily, you know?
It makes me think of that Rumi quote again. Yeah. The Rumi quote is emphasizing allowing oneself to really feel the pain of the wound, even if there wasn't this sound. Like one can tell from just the image of, you know, how the woman looks in the bath, one gets that feeling. And I think that is very much the feeling of what was the opening track on Night Flowers. Yeah. It's called Night Flowers because there are a certain type of flowers that bloom in darkness. So there's a sense of being at the end of a doomed relationship, looking back. When you did give a brief kind of synopsis of the narrative thread of the EP, then the gardener introduces the other person in the relationship as a piece of work. They don't agree in hands. Then in a way, you were saying in that track, the character is recognizing that they've lost themselves.
In the song Away.
In the song Away. Yeah. So yeah, in the third track. And they're asking questions like, what am I to you but a folded page in an unread book?
Yeah. Yeah, the lyric is, what am I to you but a folded page in a book you'll never read? Yeah. So meaning like, oh, I should get back to this later, and then like put this on the shelf.
Yeah, so we're kind of reflecting on this desire that humans have to turn things into neat narratives. Yeah. And Tiny Desk is a little bit resistant to that, has always been. Yeah. And so in that song, here we have the protagonist recognizing that the neat love story that they've been constructing isn't a collaborative story that the gardener, the character introduced in track 2, they're not telling the same story. Yeah. Then this character won't move backwards. Yeah. So they make a decision at the end to move on.
I mean, and I think that they're both true, and that if you put things in a certain order, there is like a narrative there, but also like these are all just a bunch of songs I wrote in a certain time period about a relationship and also an amalgamation of relationships. Not even necessarily just mine, because like you draw inspiration from all over the place.
Yes.
So getting into like what the title of Elegies means, like an elegy is, well, I mean the literal like dictionary definition is like a poem or a song that's sort of in memoriam to, in theory, a person. But these are elegies to a relationship. In that sense, I think that it's really accurate way of describing them as a collection of elegies, you know, versus like an elegy and then they're all like pieces of that.
Yeah.
They're like all little elegies to a relationship, not even necessarily the same relationship, or to a time or to an experience. And I think basically the common thread in all the songs, narrative aside, is just that it's like me processing loss, love, like all of those things, and sort of elegizing them. So like, here's my memorial to that, and this is done now. They're not songs about a relationship that has a future. They're not songs about a relationship that's still continuing. They're elegies to something that is passed away. So
interesting.
Yeah.
And so you just said putting narrative aside, and to some extent I was kind of revisiting the narrative that you thought about when you were sequencing Night Flowers, so as to highlight how set aside that narrative is in Elegies. It would be odd for an album called Elegies to end with Backwards, which says I won't go backwards, because Elegies, that's what the Elegies are and do. They look backwards, they reflect it. Focusing on the sequencing, the very different sequencing of Elegies. Very different, but incorporating all four of those songs. Let's begin at the end. Elegies, one thing it does is throw chronology out the window. And so let's begin at the end, in the spirit of Elegies, with Backwards and then the Singularity.
Backwards is like a banger of a song. It's like, it's the biggest, most bombastic song on the record. And
it's the most self-confident. The person who had a concern about losing themselves. Like they are the new lion. Perhaps to go back to that metaphor.
In as much as sequencing ever plays into my songwriting, when I wrote Wrong, the track 1, I knew it was track 1. It just felt like the opening of something. And it's been pretty rare, aka almost never, in my career that I've had songs that had those attributes to them, like, okay, this is a track 1, or this is a track 10 or 8 or whatever it is, you know? And Singularity, when I wrote it, I was like, this is the end of the record. So those are the bookends. And then putting them together besides that was sort of more of like a musical. I wanted it to flow like a set would flow, a live set. And oftentimes the dynamics of a live set are such that after you have this big thing, kind of like it as is in the tide within the constraints of that song, when you have something big and loud and, you know, in your face, it's successful oftentimes to contrast that. Otherwise, things kind of build and ebb and flow, and so we constructed the album like a live set in that way, from a strictly musical standpoint. I can honestly say I didn't even consider the narrative when I was putting them together.
So the opening lyric of the closing song does end up being, how do we end up back at square one?
That's like,
did that come about after you realized sonically this is the last song? Then did that lyric
come that song was the first song I wrote of these batch of songs.
This batch,
of all 8 of them. And it was literally I feel like the answers to these questions are more boring than your interpretations of them, which is a bummer, but also kind of a good metaphor for life.
Nice, yeah.
So it's just about, it's my second time writing a song using outer space and quantum physics and stuff as a metaphor.
The first one is called Quantum.
First one's called Quantum. I'm really into space and science, so I do that a lot. But it's about, there was a relationship or a person that was in my life that happened twice. And like twice, 3 times, I don't know, whatever, multiple times.
on again, off.
They came back into my life more than once.
Okay.
And was very kind of a star-crossed sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's that moment of like, how did I put myself in the position to get hurt again?
Okay.
And like, why can't we make this work?
Is that what Quantum is about?
Yeah.
Because that has the lyric, come back around if you get the chance.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that song and how that particular verse evolves when I was developing these ideas about how Elegies resists narrative.
Yeah.
You might think that you know your trajectory, but roads change when you're not looking all the time.
Yeah, that's about quantum physics, but also about love,
Okay, so what's it saying about quantum physics? How does it relate to love?
So the, like, roads change when you're not looking all the time. The kind of ethos of quantum physics and how they figured out that there was that it existed was the rules of physics and the laws of physics at a certain level of smallness, far smaller than we could ever see. And potentially like smaller than we can even really comprehend. Yeah. They just break down. The laws of physics just stop applying at a certain point. Yeah. And so they noticed this and they were like, that's bizarre. Like we have this thing over here and then all of a sudden it's over here. And like, how does that happen? Like the laws of physics mean that it can't happen. And basically, in layman's terms, how quantum physics came to be was like, well, there has to be a point at which physics laws don't apply anymore, and the rules kind of change, and it's sort of like they don't really get what the rules are still. They're still sort of figuring them out. That fascinated me, first of all, but second of all, I love metaphor, as you know, if you've ever heard my music. And the metaphor of that as far as life goes and relationships is very accurate and true, I think, in the sense that you might think you know what the next thing is, but the roads change all the time. The map changes all the time. The physics, the laws break down, you know? I mean, you might think you are like done with someone, or you might think that, you know, something's over, or you might think you know what your life's gonna look like, and you just don't, because that's not the nature of it. So that's what that song was about. And that song was about this idea of like, you know, sort of like that Erykah Badu song, I Guess I'll See You Next Lifetime, you know, like it's like, well, you know, it didn't work out this life, but who knows what the future holds, or the alternate universes hold, or whatever. And Singularity is sort of expanding on that idea, because the chorus is maybe in another lifetime. It's just sort of about like kind of succumbing to this idea that for whatever reason you and this person are drawn to each other and have some sort of like cosmic connection, and that maybe it won't work out this life and maybe it won't work out the next one, but you never know. It's bittersweet, but there's like an undercurrent of hopefulness to it, and I think that that's sort of every song of ours. If you could summarize it, would be dark and moody and weary, world weary, but like hopeful at the same time.
So Quantum is not the only song that's informed by quantum physics.
Singularity is.
Singularity on the new record is as well.
Well, actually it's funny because there's a lyric in it that's very much a metaphor in the very traditional sense, because it says we met at the edge of a black hole and we let it pull us in and we won't let go. And that, I just liked that visual. It's just sort of loosely tied to the theme of the song. It doesn't like further the narrative necessarily or anything, but just this idea, I thought that was the best possible way to describe how it feels when you meet someone. It's the same person from that song. It's the same concept of meeting someone and being sort of doomed from the start and like watching it happen as almost like an observer.
Yeah.
Like watching yourself get pulled into this mess.
Yeah.
And just making an almost subconscious decision to just let it pull you into the abyss.
Yeah, so again, when we're standing on the edge of the black hole, then we're kind of metaphorically in the same place that we're in when we're immersing ourselves in the water of the failed relationship. In the bath.
Yeah.
There does seem to me to be something kind of quantum physicsy, narrative resisting about Tiny Deaths.
Yeah.
You were kind of hinting at this a moment ago as well, but in our previous interview, you highlighted that if Tiny Deaths, on the one hand, gets played in like snowboard videos, and is like dancey and has very much a sense of fun, clearly there's a darkness too, and that's coming through in the lyrics, but it also comes through in the sound. So this quantum physicsy, narrative resisting aspect of Tiny Deaths, is that something that you kind of strive for, or is that something that kind of comes naturally?
Tiny Deaths was for me a response to just being bored with the songwriting I had been doing up to that point. It's very traditional, either folk or R&B or pop songwriting.
Because you had the project with Kyle, with Guante,
and
A Loud
Heart. And then before that, actually, I did solo singer-songwriter stuff for years. That's what I did first, with just me and a guitar. I don't know. I think it coincided with getting into improv and using my voice more as just an instrument. I just sort of wanted to mess around with the song structure a little bit and mess around with like what does a narrative look like, and what does a story look like. Can you tell a story or get a point across with kind of poetry or loose narrative or symbolism, metaphor? Does it need to be like a story?
Is there a desire to kind of interrupt our storytelling, because we're constantly constructing stories to make sense of experience at any given moment? We're constructing a story. Is there something about Tiny Desk, perhaps especially in a live setting, where part of what the band is doing, if we step back and think what's happening here, is catching humans in the act of that and saying, no, don't construct the story about the relationship between these songs. Be in the moment, experience this mood.
I think honestly, like, mood is, I mean, I'm a songwriter by nature, and like I said, lyrics are very important to me, but I think the overall goal, if there is one, of the project is to create, like I said, like a world and a mood that is, when you listen to a record, that's where you are. And there is that suspension of disbelief in that way of just sort of like, just be here, and like, it's sort of like a safe space to like feel your feelings, you know? And or dance or whatever it is. And if you feel, and this is something we talked about also in the last interview, but if you feel like reading more into the lyrics or delving into what I'm saying, there's gonna be plenty of food there for you. Because lyrics are important to me, but you don't have to either, you know? So.
We referred briefly to how important improv was to the genesis of the band Tiny Deaths. So very specifically, it was there was an improv night called Year of the Horse. And that was run by members of Solid Gold. And Ben Clark, you were saying before, kind of babysat the residency.
So all of us except for people who have later been added through just meeting them through music, but all the original people who I started playing live with this project are people I met through participating regularly in this improv night. And then at a certain point, all of us regulars were sort of responsible for babysitting the residency while Solid Gold was on tour with Marijuana Death Squads. And then that's how we sort of figured out we had chemistry all together. And I sort of said to them, I don't have anything going on right now, but if I ever need a band for anything, like you four, I mean, it was you three, but us four, that's what it's going to look like. And they were like, cool. And then when the Chalice broke up and we I got the songs back from Grant and we started like really taking it more seriously, I was like, I asked them right away. They were the only people I asked, and they all said yes. So
all of a sudden you had a project and
a band.
And a band.
In like a month. Yeah. Yeah, it's been sort of charmed, I guess. Like in that way, in the sense that it sort of, things just fell in my lap that made sense, and I sort of just, not that made sense, but that felt right, I guess. And it's been the least amount of struggle of any musical project I've ever been a part of.
Yeah.
In the sense of like, it all just sort of works and feels really rewarding, and I still feel as excited and as fulfilled and as inspired by working with Grant as I did the first week I met him. So
yeah, I
feel really lucky in that, because it's been, going on 4 years that we've known each other and been working together, and I still get so excited when, we write a new song, and so excited when he sends me something new to work on. So
yeah. And there's separate excitement about working with these particular musicians, like recreating the songs.
Yeah.
Something that we only really began to dip into is the relationship between the live performance and the studio production. Your gear, you have a couple of pedals that you use.
Yeah, I still use the GD20.
Yeah. Well, that's the one which is the most exciting to focus on a little bit more now. So can you remind us, what does that pedal allow you to do?
So technically it's just a delay pedal.
Yeah.
But it's unique in that because you can set, it's DD, digital delay. You can set a specific number for the beats per minute on it instead of just tapping it out and like trying to kind of estimate.
Yes.
And because of that, it makes it really friendly to use with electronic music, because when you're working to a grid, like with a computer, you can't estimate, because the human error catches up with you eventually if you repeat something enough times. So basically what you can do with it is, if you set the delay, quote-unquote, slow enough, a fraction of what the real beats per minute is of the song, you can make it loop.
The product isn't designed so as to do that.
It's not designed to be a looper, but I use it as a looper. I started writing these songs after I learned how to loop, and I write songs with loops in mind. So like the singularity is around. One part will come in, and then another part will come in, and then another part will come in, and maybe they get introduced separately, but when you put them all together, they work all together. And recreating that live, if you loop the parts, you can just keep stacking them, and so you can make that happen live as well, and I become sort of like a chorus of myself.
Habitually what you're doing there, I think it does come through, once again, even in the lyrics. Though there's that one song which says, I won't go backwards, we will go backwards, but it's not.
I mean, that's me getting myself out of the cycle.
Okay, so the song Backwards is a decision to break out of the circularity.
The circularity of it. Yeah, and because I think a lot of people have a tendency in relationships, like usually if people break up, it doesn't stick. Yeah. Oftentimes it doesn't stick.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that
many people would have that story of, well, we dated and then we broke up for a couple months and then we got back together and then that time was the last time, or and then we broke up again. So there's songs about every point in the record. So there's the songs about like, okay, that was good, but now it's done, and then it's like, wait, how did I end up back in this relationship? And then there's songs like, okay, no, I'm seriously done now. And then there's songs about being in the relationship and knowing that it's probably going to fall apart and just kind of doing it anyway. And I think that there's like validity in all of that, as far as I don't think there's anything wrong with doing something that you know isn't built to last. I think that it's important to protect yourself a little bit, and that's, that's valid, but it's also valid to do things for the experience of them and to gain something out of that. And I know we talked about this the last time I talked to you, but we have a kind of obsession with like permanence. Yeah. Especially in Western culture, of like, well, if it doesn't last forever, it was a failure. Yeah. Like you see the way people write about celebrity divorce and like their marriage failed. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting, the use of, it seems just natural to describe that as a failed marriage, or as a failed relationship.
And I think a failed marriage, by my own definitions, is more a marriage that lasts longer than it's healthy. Yeah. And that's more of a failure to me than calling it when it's time to call it.
Yeah, or that fails to be and to recognize what it is in its singularity. Yeah, perhaps.
So I hope that the take home from these songs, besides just that, like, oh man, you've been in a lot of shitty relationships, is that, like, so what?
Right.
You know? Like, I'm still here, and I've learned a lot, and I've had some really wonderful moments with some really overall wonderful people.
Yeah. And those moments are to be valued. So I feel like...
they're valuable in and of themselves. Like, regardless of the context in which they exist or in what they lead to.
Yeah.
Like, being in love or feeling fulfilled or taking a chance or doing whatever, it's so valuable. And it's like what makes life worth living. You know?
If you were to write a traditional Western narrative about your experiences, then I would think of the sequencing of Night Flowers, and there might be this neat story where you were in a loop, and then you realized what you were losing in yourself by being in that loop, so you decided to break out of it, and that was a happy ending.
Yeah.
And...
life's more complicated than
that, exactly. And there's something much more quintessentially Tiny Deaths about not having that sequencing and valuing the loop. It's really interesting to think of it in that way, given the story that we've been telling, where before Tiny Deaths, you were saying that there was more passivity to the music career. For example, with A Loud Heart, you know, Kyle said, I want to have a band where, you know, where someone plays acoustic guitar and I rap. Yeah, exactly. And so you could kind of fit into that. And then with Tiny Deaths, to me it seems a combination of two really important moments for you. Seeing what Grant was doing with Abby initially, and then also experiencing the improv with the proto Tiny Deaths band. Those two things, then there is this surge of activity and you create, you bring Tiny Deaths into being. So then there is this moving forward and it's very active, but then what Tiny Deaths is resists too much forward movement.
I just think that, like, I tend to overthink things in general as a person. I'm an analytical person. And there's a certain degree to where you, like, if you strike gold with something and it feels right, like, not to overanalyze it too much.
Right. Okay. So certainly don't listen back to this interview. Forget it happened.
No, it's okay. I mean, these are like, they're questions that come up, but you just have to consciously be like, nope, I'm just going to keep making songs.
Yeah.
Hope they turn out okay.
So when and where is the Elegies record release happening?
It's happening at Ice House on February 10th with Lot.
Oh, great.
As the support, and she's fantastic. You might know her from Fog, if you've seen Fog play.
Yeah, she used to play with Battery Boy as well.
And We Are the Willows. Yeah, she's very, very good and cool person. And then there's going to be DJ sets throughout the night from Dosh and Al Church and Jeremy Ilsacker.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. That's
all
going to
the
be fun.
homies are going to come DJ.
Yeah.
And I'm on a group text right now with the three of them, so 4 of us, planning stuff, and it's the most fun, most hilarious group text I've ever been part of in my life.
What manner of DJ sets are they going to play?
I think they're going to take turns with like 3 songs.
Oh, circulate. Looping.
Yeah.
Can't escape from these circles.
Yeah, exactly.